Okay, we're gonna continue on. I'm gonna tell you that the speakers before me. I didn't talk to them about anything today that I was going to be covering, but I'm going to tell you my teammates covered a really great, excellent lessons that go right along with this. So I hope everyone was taking notes and listening. We're going to pick up where we left off last time. I know you probably thought you'd heard it all about 1074, right? No, the well never ends. You know, Yahweh's well of knowledge and information, and he never ceases to amaze, and I think you're going to be amazed at what you see today. Can I have my first slide? And remember, we're talking about this 1074, the Pastor Israel Hawkins tag issued in 2016. And by the way, have you heard the news? You heard the rumor? Okay, somebody said, what rumor? Okay, great, thanks. Well, can you show the next slide? We found them. We found the two. You know, the two witnesses. Okay? We found them. And you're never going to guess. Now remember, that 1074, you write that down, write that phrase down, we found the two. And you're never going to guess where we found them. Where you found them. Can we have the next slide? They were at Abel Way, formerly known as Oak Forest. That's where they're at. Okay? Isn't that amazing? 1074. An amazing coincidence. These are the two. Can I have my next slide? The two in Daniel. The two that Daniel spoke about. You know, that very humble servant Daniel, who would not eat of the king's table, him and his companions, and were blessed with knowledge and wisdom and understanding for their humbleness, for their humility to Yahweh. The two in Daniel, the two witnesses. And I'm going to show you today, yes, Daniel saw them and he heard them. This is no accident. Can I have my next slide? And I practiced to sing this for you, but I'm not going to. But remember, Yahweh says he's my witness. He's my witness. He's my witness. Okay? 1074. He's my witness. Yeah. It's incredible to me. Can I have my next slide? He's one of the 7 Malachim. Okay? He's the western light on that lampstand, that menorah. The western lamp. Remember, western lamp was 1074. I can't cover all these again. You got to go back and you got to study them. Can I have my next slide? He was foreseen by Daniel. Foreseen by Daniel, okay? And remember, on the sea of glass, on the television, okay? He was foreseen by Daniel, the prophet. Can I have my next slide? He was spoke of by Daniel, okay? He was spoke of by Daniel, and I want you to understand something. Daniel, the prophet, was only mentioned 2 other times besides the book of Daniel. He was mentioned and Yahshua mentioned him in Medikill 24:15 when he said, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, then you need to get to the place, right? And he's mentioned in another place too that we're going to talk about a little later. Can I have my next slide? Let's read this together. This is from the 14th book of Israel, part 1. I could almost call this the sermon that almost wasn't. When you drive 400 and something miles on just your battery, when, you know, pastor tells you, hey, don't worry, just turn off the AC, don't use any electric, and just drive. You'll get here. And I made it. We made it. We made it. The greatest mechanic ever, okay? Just leave off the AC and go. This is from the 14th book of Israel, part 1. He says, we're going to guard and keep those laws. We've started already. The challenge is going out to the leader of the kings of the earth. The beastly system started in 1962. A broadcast. I told you about that last week. It's increased somewhat. We've reached a few back then, and that few let us. Know by the number that came to the house of Yahweh in 1982 and 83, after a building was built and a sign put up saying the house of Yahweh. People still remembered that broadcast from two brothers named J.G. and Bill. You want to look up the records and see what his name was. Look them up and you'll find two brothers brought that show called, and J.G. asked the questions, Bill answered the questions. Now, this to me is simply remarkable because Daniel, it says Daniel wrote about, and notice the number 1962. Daniel wrote about that year because he saw those two brothers and he heard them on the question and answer show, and I'm going to prove it to you. Go to the next slide. The first HOY broadcast. Okay? Now, I know you're thinking, or you may be thinking, well, there wasn't a house of Yahweh in 1962. Well, yes, there was. They were called J.G. and Bill. The living stones. Remember, the house is not a building. Okay, it's the people that make up the house. Okay, and those two witnesses were broadcasting in 1962. So you can, that was the first radio broadcast. Can I have my next slide? Where the world heard, or at least some part of the earth there, in the surrounding area, heard the voice of the Moloch. The voice of the Moloch, 1074. Okay? Now let's go to the next slide. Turn to Daniel 9, please. Everybody, turn there. Daniel 8. Daniel 8. Turn to Daniel 8. We're going to read this together. I should have probably had you read it first before I turn that slide on. If you could turn the slide off for a moment. I want everybody to focus on this. Daniel 8. It's on page 680. Daniel 8:13. It says, now this is the first time that Daniel sees anybody in this book, okay? In Daniel 8:13 he says, then I heard one saint speaking. One saint speaking, he said. I heard one saint speaking. Well, I wonder who that was. Can you put it back up? One saint speaking is 1074. Okay? One saint speaking. Now, is that a coincidence? Let's find out. Can you go to the next slide? That word speaking, okay? That word speaking, it's number 1696, and it means answer, be spokesman, teach, tell. Okay, who was the one that was giving the answers? That's right. The answers came from 1074, okay? Can I have my next slide? Remember, Yahweh says in Isaiah 49:2, he's like a sharp sword. You know, his words, his teaching that comes forth, because remember that sharp sword is the word of Yahweh. Now let's look at the next slide. The next coincidence. Let's look at 8:13 again. Then I heard one saint speaking, we know who that was, and another saint said to the one that spoke. Well, let's find out. Notice 1062. That should ring a bell because this has been brought out before. And I know I get up here sometimes and I say, you remember? And you're like, no, I don't remember anything. I understand that. That's why you got to go back and study these numbers. So another saint said is 1062. Can we have the next slide? Let's find out who 1062 is. Oh, the firstborn, the oldest? The firstborn, the oldest. J.G. Hawkins was born before Israel Hawkins. He was 10 years older. This is undeniable. Okay, so it's showing you, okay, that the one saint speaking was Israel Hawkins, and another saint said to the one that spoke, that was J.G. Well, let's look at more proof. Go to the next slide. That word where it said, and another saint speaking said, it says, where it says, another saint said, that word said means asked and asking. Remember, J.G. asked, Israel answered. The question and answer show. Did Daniel see it? Oh, yes, he did. This humble servant of Yahweh He saw it. He saw it and he heard it. He heard the first House of Yahweh broadcast, and the evidence is undisputable. You can't dispute this. You know, you couldn't dispute the prophecy, but now you got the numbers backing it up, and you cannot dispute it. And he's not the only one that saw it. The great deacon that spoke before me, he talked about another saint who was locked up in prison in 96 AY. Can I have my next slide? Daniel, Yochanan, and Israel working together there. 1976. When was the mark of the beast written? That's right. And Yochanan saw you. Go to my next slide, please. Noah, Daniel, Eob, 1074. Go to Yahmatria 14. You can read it on your slide there too. It says, though these three men, Noah, Daniel, and Eob, were in it, they would deliver only themselves by their righteousness, says Father Yahweh. But you know what? You know why 1074 is sitting there? Because that man is on the same par. This house is on the same par as Noah, Daniel, and Eob. Because of the humility of the saints. That robe of righteousness that we're putting on. Right, saints? That robe of humility that comes from, the meekness that comes from wisdom. And wisdom is actually applying the knowledge we've been taught in the house of Yahweh. Okay, that's where it comes from. Can I have my next slide? Yochanan saw you. Saw who? 1074. But remember, 1074 is who? It's all of us. It's the family, the Hawkins family tag. You don't remember? 1074? Pastor says in the 16th book of Israel here, he says, I think his house is ready. I think you're all ready. I think the chores have been made, or the choices have been made, and the ones who have been yielding to Yahweh, they've been selected and put together. They're exactly the ones who Yochanan saw and Daniel saw. You see that? There were many others besides that, but if you get those two, then you'll start seeing this in the others when you get to them. Go to my next slide. Let's look at some more proof. A flying messenger. Y'all remember the flying Moloch? Revelation 14. Go there and read it. Can I have my next slide? More proof. Hot bird 613. Hot bird satellite. You remember? The word coming from the satellite? 1074. What an amazing coincidence. If I was a doubter, I wouldn't be doubting no more. I mean, I don't know how we can doubt this evidence. But there's even more. Can you go to the next slide? Because it's called the Hot Bird Eutelsat. EU, or European Telecom Satellite. See the logo, and notice whose number comes up. What a coincidence. That hot bird must have been made for us. The hot bird 613, right? Next slide. But it wasn't just hot bird. It was galaxy and hot bird. Remember? Because it changed. We got the galaxy satellite too. And there's his number again. Wow, how do you do this, Yahweh? Must have been a lot of planning that went into this, right, House of Yahweh? And we're worried about getting here on just our battery? No, it ain't just our battery. Yahweh's in full control. But there's even more. Can I have my next slide? Because this man is anointed for uprightness. Okay, he's the anointed for uprightness in Isaiah 45:1. And I know the King James, it says Cyrus of Persia. So can I have my next slide so we can put this to rest? Cyrus of Persia, 1074, right? Okay, so who is Cyrus? Yeah, exactly what you're reading in your book of Yahweh, okay? That's laid to rest now, right? House of Yahweh? All right, now we're going to get into some really great stuff, okay? We haven't seen anything yet. Can you turn over to Isaiah 13? Because I was rushed through this last time. I didn't have a lot of time, but now I know why. Isaiah 13:1 on page 537. says, the burden against Babylon, which Isaiah, son of Amos, saw. Lift up a banner upon the high mountains, raise your voice to them, wave your hand, so they may enter the gates of the called out ones, the house of Yahweh. I have commanded my sanctified ones, I have also called my mighty ones, those who rejoice in my exaltation. Okay, now, the called out ones I showed you. Can I have my next slide? Last time, when I was up here, we showed this right here. The called out ones, 1074. Wow. An amazing coincidence, right? Isaiah 62, verse 12. Everybody there? I want you to see this so you can't deny this, okay? I want you to see this with your own eyes. It says, and they will call them the holy people, the redeemed of Yahweh. By the way, back up to verse 10. Pass through the gates. Prepare the way for the people. Build up the highway. Take out the stones. Lift up a banner for the people. That's you, house of Yahweh. I'm going to prove it. Look at verse 12. And they will call you the holy people, the redeemed of Yahweh, and you will be called, sought out, a city not forsaken. Okay. Can you show the next slide? There's the banner, okay? Proclaiming Yahweh our righteousness. Yahweh is our righteousness, okay? There's the banner. Now, show the next slide. There it is, word for word. You, right there. There's not one word missing out of that scripture. That's you, house of Yahweh. The holy people. Read it again. They will call them the holy people, the redeemed of Yahweh, and you will be called, sought out, a city not forsaken. Look at the number, house of Yahweh. That's us. Rejoice. These are things that we need to hold on to in our minds while we're sweating in the kitchen, while we're sweating doing our jobs, you know, when it's 110. Hey, don't worry, it's going to get hotter, okay? Yeah. But you got to hold on to these things. You know, this is the only house Yahweh regards. Let's go to my next slide, please. Yahweh will regard this house, okay? Yahweh will regard it. You know why? Can I have the next slide? There's an honorable pastor over this house. Number 1074. Okay? There's an honorable pastor that honors Yahweh by uplifting and exalting righteousness. Remember, Yahweh our righteousness. Yahweh Zitkanu, 3072. And remember, Yahweh Zitkanu, 1074. What a coincidence. But I got one more thing. Turn to Romans 10. We're gonna solidify this, okay? We're gonna put the I don't know how to put it. Let's just go there and read it. Romans 10 on page 881. I want you to get ready for this. Let's read 12 or 13 through 15. It says, for whoever calls with the name of Yahweh will be saved. How then can they call upon him in whom they have not believed? And how will they believe in him of whom they have not heard? And how will they hear without a preacher? And how can they preach unless they are sent? How can they preach unless they are sent? There's only one sent in this last days. Show the next slide. There it is. Read it. Read it. Look at the number. Read it word for word, what you just read. There's nothing missing out of that. 1934. The one sent. Listen to him. Obey him. Okay, because my last slide, there is no other. There is no other. There is no other. Where are you going to go? There's nowhere to go. You're here. You found the house of Yahweh. I would say I hope I never have to bring another sermon like that, but I hope I do. But may Yahweh bless your understanding, and I hope you're greatly rejoicing in the information. And if you'd all please stand, I'd like to now turn it over to one of Yahweh's great priests, the great Kohan Yehuda Hawkins.